It's good to see you again.
My pleasure. Great to be here. Thank you, Lee.
Okay, for our benefit of our audience, Dr. Nile Gardiner, it's our pleasure to welcome you as our first guest in this series of CIBUK and Facts for EU interviews with key figures from the UK and around the world. And you're the first, you're our guinea pig. You are the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, DC, and a very highly respected figure. Already this year, you have notched up interviews with David Frost, Lord David Frost, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, the chairman of the Conservative Party, Oliver Dowden, and Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary. That's not a bad list for this year, so well done on that. But today you're the victim, you're on the receiving end. Niall, you have what I think is an interesting perspective on UK politics and on our relationship with the European Union. You're British, but you live and work in Washington, DC, and you also have significant experience in working in Lady Thatcher's private office as an aide to the late Iron Lady herself.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Lee. It's great to be here, and I think a very, very timely discussion as well with all the developments on both sides of the Atlantic. So thank you for having me on the show today.
Right. So let's kick off with the first question. As a British person living and working in Washington, DC, how do you see the United Kingdom in terms of its geopolitics, its strengths and its weaknesses, and its prospects as a newly independent country?
Well, I think that the future looks very bright actually for Britain in the Brexit era. I think Brexit is one of the most exciting developments on the world stage in many decades, and I think that without a doubt the United Kingdom, I think, is going to thrive and prosper in the Brexit era. And you still have, of course, all of the the doom and gloom prophets of decline and so on out there who claim that Brexit's going to be a big failure. You have the old Remainer elites who are still fighting this sort of rearguard action, much like a few Japanese soldiers who wouldn't surrender after the end of World War II. It's a bit like that basically with the Remainer camp. And so you do see, I think, the prophets of doom who are trying to tear down Brexit and who claim that Brexit's going to go down in flames. But the reality is, and watching the situation as well from across the Atlantic, from here in Washington DC, I think that Brexit offers tremendous opportunity, tremendous hope, and above all, it represents freedom and sovereignty for the British people, and these things matter. And the American people understand that. I've lived here in the United States now for 20 years. I think that so many Americans supported Brexit because they identify with it, because they believe in the same principles of sovereignty, freedom, self-determination that the American people really, frankly celebrate. They cherish these same values and these same principles. And so, Brexit's good not only for Britain, but also for America as well. It's good for the US-UK special relationship. It's good for British leadership on the world stage. And if you look at what Boris Johnson has done with British leadership on Ukraine, it's been outstandingly good. Now, there are other areas, I think, with regard to British government policy that perhaps could need more encouragement and improvement. But I think on the Ukraine front, the British government's leadership has been absolutely phenomenal on this. And you hear this every day from President Zelensky, who has been full of praise actually for Boris Johnson's leadership. Britain is leading in large part because of Brexit and because of Britain's newfound self-confidence in the Brexit era. Being outside of the European Union is a great blessing for Britain. It's a great blessing for the British people, and it's also great news for Ukraine as well. And as we've seen, the UK is head and shoulder above any country in Europe in terms of leadership on Ukraine. In fact, I mean, the only country I think that really compares is actually Poland. who's done an absolutely outstanding job in terms of support for Ukraine and taking on large numbers of Ukrainian, refugees who've fled the country. And the UK and Poland, I think, together have really projected the kind of leadership that, the French and the Germans can only dream of. Because let's face it, the Germans and the French have been absolutely useless on Ukraine. Emmanuel Macron's been busy licking the boots of Vladimir Putin the whole time. And the Germans, of course, have been absolutely hopeless on this. So, so if you compare the UK with what the French and the Germans and the EU have done on Ukraine, there's no comparison. And that's a good example, I think, of British leadership in the Brexit era. And you have a self-confident Britain, a resurgent Britain. There's a greater sense of self-belief in the UK right now. And that's a great thing. And Brexit really is a huge part of that. And I look forward to Britain's future as a free sovereign nation that can negotiate its own free trade agreements, that is free of the shackles of EU regulations and laws. And in so many areas, Britain can breathe a huge sigh of relief. That's a great thing, isn't it? I mean, that's encouraging to see that from the United States and across the world. I'm in no doubt Brexit's going to be great for Britain and for the free world. And my former boss, Margaret Thatcher, would have absolutely celebrated and cherished Brexit.
Well, we'll come back to her later on if we may.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think Brexit's a great thing. Let's celebrate it, cherish it, and let's look forward to a new era for Britain.
It's very interesting to hear your perspective from the United States about your feelings of a newly self-confident Great Britain going forward, United Kingdom going forward. I happen to personally agree with you. I think things are changing, but it's very interesting to get your perspective. Can I move on?
Yes, absolutely.
I want to move on to the American side of things. How does the US media and the American people see the UK right now, do you think? And secondary question, do these views, do you think, differ in any way from those of the White House?
That's a great question, because you have a number of different perspectives in the United States, depending on what the media outlet is or what group of society it is. And one has to, I think, differentiate between the broader general sort of American public and some of the sort of liberal elites who dominate a lot of the media world outside of say Fox News. But if you look at if you're reading the Washington Post or the New York Times or or watching CNN or MSNBC, and you look at the coverage of the UK, a lot of it's very negative. A lot of the Brexit coverage is very negative from the kind of the elite US media.
We certainly hear that here, Nile.
Yeah, exactly. So disconnect between kind of ruling elites and what the average American person thinks. And so I talk to a lot of American conservatives, grassroots conservatives across the country. And one of the issues that I discuss with them, of course, is Brexit and the current state of affairs in terms of US-UK relations. And Brexit, actually, interesting enough, out of all of the foreign policy issues that American conservatives focus on, Brexit is actually one of the most important. And the reason
why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's because it's because they identify with what Brexit means, and which is why Brexit was a big cause célèbre actually among American conservatives at the time of the referendum. And it's because US conservatives, and America, I believe, is at heart a conservative country. We're talking about large numbers of people here. US conservatives thought that Brexit was a great development for liberty and freedom, and they thought that this was also a great message to be sending to the kind of establishment ruling elites that on both sides of the Atlantic people want to have more freedom, and Brexit's all about freedom, and Americans identified, of course, with the message of sovereignty, self-determination. So Brexit's actually out of all of the foreign policy issues facing the United States, Brexit actually has been one of the most popular for American conservatives for the
So
last.
you feel it's kind of resonated with the people, but hasn't necessarily
I
been
think so,
approved
yes.
of by the media.
Yeah, especially with with the American public at large. I think Brexit is, is generally very popular. Also, if you speak to any Republican member of Congress, Brexit is a very, very popular concept, and Republican members of Congress are very, very supportive of Brexit. In fact, you'll find some Democrats as well who see Brexit as an opportunity for a US-UK free trade agreement. So it's quite mixed on the Democratic side, but among conservative Republicans, Brexit's very, very popular, and I think that also generally speaking, and opinion polls show this, the vast majority of Americans, something like 70% or so, see the United Kingdom as either America's closest ally or as the closest ally alongside maybe Israel. So the UK is seen across the board in the United States by most Americans as America's most important, strongest, and valuable ally. The UK remains very popular, and during the recent Platinum Jubilee celebrations, I was actually over in London covering the Jubilee for some US media, including Fox News, which is America's #1 cable news channel, and also Fox News. I had the real privilege of being in London during the Jubilee, and tens of millions of Americans are watching the Jubilee celebrations on TV. The Queen is hugely popular in America. She has an approval rating that's significantly above that of the sitting US president. I think the Queen's approval is about 70%. Joe Biden scraping 40%. The royal family is very, very popular in the United States.
Okay.
And every single US broadcaster was covering the Jubilee live on TV, and so that tells you a lot about America's affection for the royal family and affection for the British people, and that speaks volumes, really.
Yes. How do these views differ in the American administration, in the Biden administration? Because they seem to.
It's a good question. Yeah, and I've dealt a lot with the Biden administration. I mean, they're a reality in Washington here, and I get to speak to a fair number of officials in the Biden administration. Some of them actually are very hostile towards Brexit. Some of them don't like Boris Johnson. Others are more pragmatic and understand the importance of the special relationship. So it's a mixed bag, but I would say that overall, when you're talking about the Biden administration, you're dealing with an administration that's not particularly friendly towards the United Kingdom in some areas, and you've seen that on the issue of Northern Ireland. There are other areas as well. They have an instinctive anti-Brexit sort of sentiment in the White House. Joe Biden himself, I don't think, is a big believer in the special relationship. And there's a big contrast between the old Trump administration, which is very pro-British. The new, or relatively new Biden administration is about a year and a half into office. They are Euro-federalists. They're supporters of the European project. They think Brexit threatens, the European project. And so also many of them are former Obama administration officials. Boris Johnson, as we recall from his days as mayor of London, was very critical of Barack Obama, and Obama's decision to remove the Churchill bust from the White House was something that Boris attacked the Obama administration for. And Obama officials, many of them are now working for Biden, and they're sensitive to Boris Johnson's criticism. And so there's no love lost between, the Bidenistas and, and Boris Johnson.
Can I ask you?
That's for sure.
Maybe this is a tricky one, but Liz Truss came across to the States.
Yeah.
She bypassed the administration. Well, she had meetings, but then she bypassed them, and she went direct to certain states to start talking to various states about trade agreements. And I wanted to come on to trade. That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
I think we probably know what your current views are on the prospect of a UK-US trade deal with the Biden administration. I'm guessing that those are, shall we say, somewhat limited possibilities.
Yeah.
But Liz Truss went around the country, didn't she? Do you have any comments about that? Because
Yeah.
she seemed to be doing some quite interesting deals with individual states rather than with the US administration.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, Lee, because well, first, I think Liz Truss has actually been a very effective foreign secretary. I mean, I think she's been arguably, the best foreign secretary in recent, in recent decades. Although I thought Boris Johnson did a good job as well, but I think that Boris and Liz Truss have been the two best foreign secretaries in recent decades. And Liz Truss, I think, has been somebody who's projected strong British leadership on the world stage, including in the United States. And she had a good visit to the US a few months ago. And as you mentioned, she's been reaching out to individual US states, and so has the international trade team that includes Penny Mordaunt, trade minister, who's been, I think, highly effective in her role, actually, and also the international trade secretary has been very good. So, I do think that this is actually one of the areas where Brexit Britain has done really well. It's in terms of trade outreach, and although the Biden administration has not been particularly receptive with regard to a US-UK trade agreement, nowhere near as receptive as the Trump administration, for example, but there is movement on that behind the scenes. There are the ongoing discussions. And the British government is also reaching out to a wide range of individual states and doing business. And this is the right approach because, the state level, I think that, many governors of both Democratic and Republican states are keen to do more business with the UK. And the UK is the world's 5th largest economy. I mean, we shouldn't forget that the UK economy is big. 1 million Americans are employed by British companies and vice versa. And a US-UK trade deal would actually further increase that number. And so it's a win-win for both sides of the Atlantic, actually, if we get this done.
And of course, what is sometimes not understood in the United Kingdom is that some American states have economies larger than the majority of EU countries.
Yes, correct.
And therefore, doing a deal with a particular US state may sound to a UK person as not potentially very interesting, but actually it is potentially much bigger, much bigger than many EU countries.
That's right. And if you look at a state like California, for example, I mean, it has one of the world's biggest economies, so and then you consider, the size of, states like Texas, for example, Florida, and, where if you look at the, some of the biggest Republican states like Texas, Florida, those are prime examples of states that, that could do big deals with the UK, with large populations, big economies. California, of course, run by the Democrats, it's a little bit harder. But if you look at Republican run states with large size economies, these are prime places for the UK to be doing business with, and I think that, the prospects look very good.
And I think it's worth just restating for our audience that the USA is the largest destination for UK exports.
Correct.
Far exceeding any EU country, for example.
Yes.
And that is the case without any trade deal. And with these maybe supplementary state deals, who knows, things will potentially improve. But it's very interesting to get your perspective on all of this from your side over there. Now, can I talk about the elephant in the room, the European Union?
Absolutely, yes. It's a big elephant. It is, but a very slow-moving, lumbering one.
Yes, it's something of great interest to all of our audience. So I wondered if you could characterize for them the overall view about the EU in the States, Do you feel people there really understand what the EU is?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You know, I think when you mention EU to you know, to say an average you know, American voter, I don't think necessarily the EU actually conjures up very positive images. And the image of the European Union, I guess, among many Americans, well, I know for sure among many Americans, I think is an image of you know, this big sort of supranational entity that you know, that tramples on national, you know, sovereignty, you know, etc. That is also home to huge welfare states and massive government spending and high taxes. That's the general image of the European Union and the United States. Now, of course, there are you know, ideological liberals, especially in Washington, inside the Washington Beltway, who worship the EU and think the EU is the greatest thing ever created. You know, Joe Biden, you know, when he was, I think, vice president, spoke at the European Parliament, and you know, gave a speech saying how you know, talked about how Brussels could claim to be the leader of the free world. Some of the most ridiculous remarks I've ever seen in my life. So, you know, Joe Biden, you know, has always been a big believer in the crazy idea that, you know, the European Union somehow is this, you know, is this great construct and so on. So you'll see that among the liberal elites, they really do worship the European Union, although, you know, the Ukraine crisis has demonstrated that the EU really is emperor with no clothes a lot of the time, and really is completely useless on a lot of things. So that, you know, that's been a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for some of the Euro-federalists here in Washington. But, you know, the Euro-federalists, I would say, really are a minority. And I think most Americans, you know, when asked about the European Union, I mean, they, you know, they have an image of some kind of, you know, socialist super state that taxes people to death.
So they don't think it's just a trading bloc.
No, I don't think so. And I think especially among you know, American conservatives, I mean, they're fully aware of what the EU represents, and they don't have a positive view of that at all. And in fact, you know, it's striking how many US Republican, you know, politicians often talk about how America should not end up like Europe or the European Union. And this is a common talking point for Republican presidential candidates, for example. We don't want to end up like the European Union because the EU is a basket case, you know. So, and I think that is the, you know, the general sort of impression that the EU, you know, projects. But you will always have the liberal elites who, you know, who think the EU is just wonderful. And
do you think the EU is a basket case yourself?
Is the EU a basket? Well, I mean, I think the EU is in many ways a completely artificial construct. It is a monument to big government, to socialism, to the centralization of power. Yes, I do think the EU is a basket case, and things are only going to get worse in the European Union.
I want to come back at the end, by the way, about what you think Margaret Thatcher might think,
yes,
because you might have some insight having worked in her private office.
Yes.
I want to turn next to the thorny issue of Northern Ireland. And we're hearing not terribly good stuff over here about the Biden administration and Congress's views about the moves that the UK are now trying to make in asserting our rights over the sovereignty of our own territory.
Yeah.
And the necessity, a key point, the necessity of protecting the Good Friday/Belfast Agreement. And the impression we get is that nobody over there seems to understand the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, and nobody seems to understand what it is to have sovereignty over your territory, which, if it happened in America, there would be uproar.
Yeah, exactly.
If Mexico claimed Texas, for example, can you imagine? So,
yeah.
Can you just comment on the Northern Ireland question specifically for us?
Yeah,
give us your insight into what you think is going on there.
Yeah, well, you know, it's my view that the Northern Ireland Protocol is completely unsustainable. And in fact, it poses the greatest single threat to the Good Friday Agreement, because, you know, the Ulster Unionists rightly reject the protocol. The protocol was forced on Britain during the negotiations, and the EU demanded it, and otherwise Britain would have been compelled to go down you know, a path of not having a deal with the EU, which would have resulted in, you know, tariff barriers on both sides. So the British avoided that by signing onto the protocol under tremendous duress, and the EU behaved absolutely appallingly in these negotiations, as though it was some kind of, you know, punishment beating. And of course it was, because you know, for the EU, the idea that a country would leave the European Union poses a you know, a democratic threat, actually, to the you know, to the future of the European project. Because when people actually, you know, vote democratically on these matters, you know, a lot of them don't like the idea of being told what to do by Brussels. And I'm sure if every European country held a referendum on, you know, on the future of EU membership, some governments might be a bit surprised by the results that they actually get, you know. So so, you know, the negotiations between the EU and the UK were absolutely horrible and arduous, and the EU is making life as difficult as possible. And this was, you know, this was absolutely the goal of the EU negotiators, to send a warning to other countries that if they dare to leave the European Union, there will be consequences. The protocol is one of those consequences. Right? And so you now have Northern Ireland being treated separately from the rest of the United Kingdom. So it's stuck within the EU single market. It's discriminated against. You have border checks on goods coming from the rest of the UK into Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is treated like a second-class, you know, part of the UK. This is unacceptable, you know. So,
but let's come back to the American perspective on this, because we're hearing all sorts of things about what the UK government is going to do from Washington.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to understand the protocol. They don't seem to understand the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement at all. Can you just comment specifically on what you think the views of the administration are, and the views of the media are over there?
Yeah. And
are we getting our message across? Which I'm going to move on in my next question to.
Yeah.
How the UK is getting a message across?
Yeah. So you know, I don't think Joe Biden knows anything about the Northern Ireland Protocol, nor does Nancy Pelosi, who lectures Britain every week on the subject. In fact,
Nancy Pelosi, just for a British audience, is the Speaker of the House. Yeah,
the Speaker of the House, represented Democrat, one of the most clueless politicians in Washington. She's clueless on this issue, but she's issuing threats left, right, and centre against the UK on a weekly basis, saying she's going to rip up a US-UK trade deal if the British dare to actually assert their own sovereignty. So, you know, I have to say that some of the comments coming from, you know, from the American left on the protocol are absolutely insane, coming from people who don't know anything about it either. The level of knowledge among the, you know, all of these left-wing politicians on the protocol is about zero, and yet they're pontificating on this as though, you know, they're you know, experts who've been working on this issue for the last 50 years, and it's absolutely preposterous. But Joe Biden has people around him who are fixated on this issue, within the National Security Council, for example, who take a keen interest in the protocol. And Biden basically, you know, repeats what his advisors say on this. Some of these advisors are intensely anti-Brexit. Some of these advisors, you know, intensely dislike Boris Johnson. And Northern Ireland is used as a kind of battering ram against the UK, is what's happening here. Also, you have the reality of, you know, the European Union embassy here in Washington is very big. I think they've got about 100 staff now. They feed relentless propaganda to the White House and to Nancy Pelosi and her, you know, people on the Hill, And so if you look at the comments coming from the Biden White House or Nancy Pelosi, they're almost word for word exactly identical to what the European Commission says. It's because the European Commission actually feeds this nonsense directly to the White House and to democratic leadership on Capitol Hill. So that's what's happening.
Nile, you have perfectly led me into my next question, which is possibly a tricky one, but the impression that we sometimes get over here on this side of the pond is that the FCDO, what used to be called the Foreign Office, now the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office,
yes, yeah,
simply doesn't seem to be doing a great job in the US representing UK's interests. Now, you've contrasted the EU, who are a splendid propaganda machine. There's no question the Commission is superb at it. What are your thoughts about how the message is getting across over there?
Yeah, you raise very important issues there, really, and fundamentally important issues. And as you point out, I mean, you know, the EU is a big propaganda machine in Washington. It has had for many years, and you know, they're actually effective in terms of selling, in my view, a lot of disinformation to you know, to the ruling you know, Washington elites here, and of course, you know, the Biden White House, you know, embraces all this stuff. So you know, so the British are up against it here in Washington, because not only do you have, of course, the EU embassy, you've got multiple European embassies as well, who are also you know, undermining the UK. And one thinks of, you know, the French, for example, as a prime example of that. Macron calls Brexit a crime, you know, and he has his vendetta against, you know, Brexit Britain. So the French invest a lot of effort in trying to, you know, undermine Britain on the world stage. And you know, Washington's a battlefield, really, of ideas, and you know, a lot of embassies compete for, you know, for in this war of ideas in Washington. The British have to be more effective. You know, I think I mentioned, you know, earlier the fact that I thought, you know, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is doing an outstanding job, but that outstanding job representing Britain has to be done by everybody who's working to advance the British message.
So let me put a straight question to you. Sitting where you are in Washington, do you think they are doing a good job? Because it doesn't come across that way over here.
Yeah, I think a lot more needs to be done. And you know, the British have got to ramp up the ground game in Washington. This is the center of the free world here. This is where everything in the world superpower gets decided, and what America does and says on the world stage matters. And that's the reality. And what America says,
Liz Truss is coming across very well. It's just all the backup doesn't seem to be there.
I think, you know, I think Britain's just got to invest a lot more in advancing its message across the world, especially here in Washington, DC. And I think that, you know, what you have seen is you've seen more government ministers, for example, on the ground here in Washington recently. That's a good thing. You need to have a much stronger presence on the ground here. But also, you know, we need to have, frankly, every day from the UK, a pro-Brexit message being projected here in Washington, DC, because, you know, people need to hear that here. And it has to be a very positive, you know, message. And, you know, it's got to really outshine the negativity that's being sold by Britain's opponents here in Washington. And the British have got to win the war of ideas here in Washington, DC, because this, you know, this place matters in terms of what happens in the world. And, you know, and I think that the British have got to step up the messaging and the ground game, and, you know, they've got to outcompete the opposition here. You know, there's no room for complacency. You know, the UK is America's closest friend and ally, but there are many players and actors here in Washington who, you know, who are selling a very different kind of message, you know, and it's an anti-Brexit message or an anti-US-UK trade deal message. And there are politicians in Washington, unfortunately, who are buying that negativity.
Got that. I want to turn actually to your work now. I'm sure everyone's been very interested in everything you've had to say, and you've been very forthright, and thank you for that. You're director of the what's called the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. Now, a lot of our audience won't know of the Heritage Foundation, but it's incredibly important in the US. You certainly have about 500,000 followers on social media. You head up this the Centre for Freedom there in the name of Margaret Thatcher. What impact do you feel you've been able to have on the American public over there?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom is part of the Heritage Foundation here in Washington. The Heritage Foundation is the largest conservative think tank or public policy organization in the United States, possibly in the world. And the Heritage Foundation has over 500,000 members. And so it is the largest, most broadly supported sort of public policy organization, I think, on the conservative side in the United States. And the mission of the Heritage Foundation, of course, is to advance and defend, conservative ideas and principles. So the Margaret Thatcher Centre is very much, the very heart of the Heritage Foundation's mission. It was established by Lady Thatcher herself personally back in 2005, and it was her view that her own think tank centre should be in Washington, D.C., at the heart of the free world, influencing the thinking of the world superpower. It was also her wish, of course, that Great Britain would leave ultimately the European Union. And she outlined that in her book, Statecraft, her last book, Statecraft, published in 2002. And I worked with Lady Thatcher for 2 years on that book. In many respects, Statecraft became the genesis of Brexit. And she made the case for the UK thinking about a future outside of the EU. She was the first major British politician to put that forward. And so the Margaret Thatcher Centre has been really at the very heart of Lady Thatcher's thinking with regard to shaping US thinking on Europe. And the Thatcher Centre played a big role, I think, in terms of shaping US thinking on Brexit, both ahead of the 2016 referendum and during the course of the Trump presidency, which of course is a very pro-Brexit US administration. And so, our key goal of the Margaret Thatcher Centre is to advance the US-UK special relationship. That special relationship is strengthened greatly by Brexit and Britain's exit from the European Union. And so, we embody, I think, in many ways, the ideals and vision of Lady Thatcher. And it was her view that the special relationship is the beating heart of the free world. And it was her view that, Britain would be a far better and stronger, more powerful force on the world stage alongside the United States, freed of the shackles of the European Union. I think that's what we see today. We see it on Ukraine, we see it on many fronts. Britain is far, far better off outside of the European Union, and Margaret Thatcher would have celebrated that freedom. And the Thatcher Centre, I think, has been, a proud part of Lady Thatcher's vision and legacy. It's our view that definitely the world is a far better place when the United States and the United Kingdom work actively together, shoulder to shoulder, standing up for the principles of freedom and sovereignty, self-determination that Margaret Thatcher herself embodied.
Yeah. We started this interview with me mentioning some of your interviewees from the UK. Very impressive list. Lord David Frost, the former Brexit minister, Right Honourable Sir Ian Duncan Smith MP, the chairman of the Conservative Party, current chairman, Oliver Dowden, Brandon Lewis, the current Northern Ireland Secretary. Pretty impressive stuff. It seems like you're a one-man band for promoting the message in Washington.
Well, I should have mentioned also that we hosted as well towards the end of last year the Home Secretary Priti Patel, who gave a major address, and also hosted our very good friend, the eminent historian Andrew Roberts as well.
But you get my point. You seem to be getting a lot of these people out there. I've certainly seen these interviews, and yet from the embassy, the British Embassy in Washington, nothing.
We've had, the pleasure of hosting I think some of the leading, conservative, figures in the United Kingdom and in not only in the last few months, but also over the course of many, many years. One thinks of, for example, the tremendous speech by Lord Frost just a few weeks ago, where he talked about the need for the British government to really return to its Thatcherite roots and to advance Thatcherite free market limited government thinking, and that was a very important speech. Oliver Dowden gave I thought a very significant speech on defeating cancel culture, which received a lot of attention in the UK, and was loudly condemned, in fact, by several members of Labour's shadow cabinet, and it caused outrage on the left in the UK. The fact that a Conservative Party chairman was actually saying that we need to stand up to the woke left and defeat this poisonous radical woke agenda, and Oliver Dowden gave a tremendous speech. And so so we provide in many ways, I think, a very important platform for advancing the latest cutting edge conservative thinking on both sides of of the Atlantic, and also it's an opportunity as well to bring together US and British conservatives.
Yeah,
talk about ideas. Yeah.
We will be providing a link below this video so that people can actually access some of the material that you've worked on. I should also add, by the way, just for the record, that both CIBUK and Facts for You are non-partisan, and we will be conducting interviews with people from right across the political spectrum. But we chose to start with Nile because we thought he would be good value for you, as indeed he has. And I'm hoping he's not going to let me down with my final question. So Nile,
I'll do my best.
I can't let you go without asking you about your time working for Margaret Thatcher, the late Margaret Thatcher. I'm just certain that our audience would love to hear any memories or favorite anecdotes from your time working for her. And
I hope that Andrew Rossendale will have an opportunity to watch this video, because when I worked for Lady Thatcher, she went out on the campaign trail. At that time, William Hague was the Conservative candidate. But she went out in support of numerous Conservative candidates on the campaign trail, back in 2001, I think it was, and she went out to Romford, Essex, a great part of Britain, actually, one of the soundest Conservative parts of the country. So she went out to Romford in support of Andrew Rossendale, and Rossendale at the time also had this wonderful bulldog, I think the name was Spike, if I recall, who went on the campaign trail as well. So we set out from Lady Thatcher's office in Belgravia out to Romford, and when we got to Romford town centre, and I recall this vividly, I was sitting with Lady Thatcher in her bomb-proof Jaguar, and as we approached the town centre, there's a huge crowd of people there, and there must have been, literally thousands of people. And when the security detail opened the doors, the weight of the crowd was so great that the doors could barely be opened. And I remember thinking, Margaret Thatcher had been out of office for 11 years at that time, and yet, the size of the crowd, they just wanted to catch a glimpse of her, was huge. And only the Iron Lady could do that, actually. And I never cease to be amazed by the sheer enthusiasm of the crowds that would gather to see her long after she had left office. And there are very few people, frankly, in the world who could, in the political world, who could actually do that. And she was one of them. And she was, really the kind of the Marilyn Monroe of the kind of political world. It was absolutely electric, and the weight of the crowd was so big that, had it not been for all the police and everything, we almost would have been crushed by the weight of the crowd. So, so I remember that star quality, and she, she loved nothing more than just meeting and greeting, just the British people. She lived her life for the British people.
And
she loved those moments, really.
You worked in her private office, not?
Yes. I was with Lady Thatcher on the day of the 9/11 attacks. And she, she was watching the Twin Towers falling. What was most striking about Margaret Thatcher's response on that day, was her, her clarity of thought, her decisive thinking, which in many ways sort of exemplified what she was all about. So her immediate reaction to the 9/11 attacks was that, the West, the free world, had to respond immediately. Her immediate thought was, we've got to fight back. We've got to defeat the enemy. Her instinct was immediately, this was Islamist terrorism. She identified the threat fast, and she said, we've got to fight and we've got to win. She was raring to go, right? And this is a day when, when she wished that she could have been Prime Minister again. She was, always the Iron Lady. It didn't matter that she was no longer Prime Minister. She knew immediately.
It's kind of been easy to work for, though.
Margaret Thatcher. She was a boss who was, without doubt, someone who expected, and rightly so, extremely high standards, from her staff, and a great deal of hard work, as it should be. And she was, she was a boss who really, she worked very hard herself and set the example. And even though, she had left Downing Street a decade earlier, she was still, always at her, always at a desk and working in the office. And so she set this incredibly high standard herself. At the same time, I found her to be a very warm-hearted and very caring boss, motherly in many respects. And I was fortunate at the time to be, I think, the youngest member of the staff. And she was, she was she was extremely kind and generous. Yeah, she was, she was like a mother figure. I mean, absolutely. And so, I there's not a day that goes by that I do not, look back with tremendous, fondness for the time that I spent working with her. It was an incredible opportunity and experience. I loved every moment, and I wish those days could come back. Margaret Thatcher, she transformed Britain, she transformed the world. She was an incredible leader, and a leader of real principle who lived every moment of her life for her country. And there's so much to be said for that. She was in a different league to the vast majority of leaders today. I will forever be grateful for the opportunity I had to spend time with her and to work with her. And she was,
very kind of you.
Blessing for the world.
It's very kind of you to share those experiences with our audience. We've come to the end of time, but Nile, on behalf of both our readership and our audience, I want to thank you enormously for your time today. You, as I said at the beginning, have been our guinea pig, but you've been a splendid one. You've performed
delighted to be so. Yeah,
admirably. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, as always, Nile. So thank you very much. And
well, thank you very much. It's been a great interview, great discussion, and thank you very much, Ali, for all the work that you do, that you've done, and that your organisation has done to advance Brexit and the cause of liberty and freedom, sovereignty, self-determination. At the end of the day, these principles really matter, and you've made a real difference in your work. So thank you very much, Lee.
You're most kind.